So Dave, what is a specific piece of legislation that you would cite as the biggest example of power being centralized that you think the founders would be very clearly against?
I mean, almost all of them. Social Security obviously would be, the Works Administration almost obviously would be, the Tennessee Valley Authority obviously would be. All of these things violate the 10th Amendment as stated in plain language.
Okay, all right, let's pick, hold on, which of those, Pisco?
What would be unconstitutional about Congress paying for a pension system?
The 10th Amendment.
So the 10th Amendment is thought of as a, first of all, big question about whether or not it's even operative text. It's just reflecting the structure of the government and basically says all powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved for the people or the states respectively.
So is that a delegated power of the federal government? No. So it's
no. The spending, wait a second.
Hold on, let Pisco go. Pisco go.
You want to move off because you know you're cooked. With respect to raising taxes, guess what? We have an amendment that lets us tax all incomes. So there's a specific amendment for taxing that. So I'll ask again, what aspect of that is unconstitutional or violates the 10th Amendment? Hey folks, please like, comment, and subscribe. And make sure to check out my newsletter. Information is in the description.
Let's just jump into it.
Okay.
Dave, you saw my conversation with Pisco.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect you disagree with Pisco on some things. Do you want to lay out your kind of high-level view of things, and then we can just pull things apart from there?
So this involves the Kirk assassination. And the operative question in the Kirk assassination is, what types of conversations are really valid conversations to be having in this present day? And the response we've been getting from the left has been not very good. And what the idea seems to be that Charlie Kirk represents a brand of ideas that is beyond the pale. And this was the message that was put forward by people like Ta-Nehisi Coates. I mean, there were another variety of online influencers that literally tried to excuse the assassination. I'm going to just discount that because I don't think anyone would defend it in a debate. But there seemed to be a large number of serious public intellectuals on the left who wanted to claim that Charlie Kirk's ideas were beyond the pale of debate in a liberal society. And this is really the problem here, because Charlie Kirk's ideas are broadly characteristic of a large percentage of the population of this country. And, there's this word that gets bandied about, not in the Ta-Nehisi Coates article, but it was implied, but this is the subject of your conversation, which was fascism. The labeling of fascist is a tool of equivocation in this case. It's a real ideology. You can look up the ideas of Giovanni Gentile if you want to. We can talk about ultranationalism and totalitarian ultranationalism, a certain variety of nationalist governments that occurred in the early 20th century, and sometimes in Latin America in the late 20th century. But in our current discourse, no one is a proponent of Giovanni Gentile. What happens is that there's two things that fascism means, broadly speaking. The first one is fascist. I mean, as you, Paul, or I can call you Paul.
Pisco,
right? You can call me Paul.
Yes.
Yeah, you can call me.
The first thing that fascism means is a bad person who is so bad or so evil that they are probably worthy of some amount of state censor and maybe vigilante violence. This is the definition of fascism you get from Hollywood movies. If a character is labeled a fascist in a Hollywood movie, that means bad person who is a proper object of state violence or vigilante violence. That was the whole point of Inglourious Bastards, and so on and so forth. You can't think of a good fascist character in a Hollywood movie. I could only think of one, which is kind of a silly example. The audience might want to guess at what that one is.
Is it Emperor Palpatine?
I think it's Oscar Schindler.
Okay, maybe, but there's a better one. The other definition, so equivocation is always taking a word that has two definitions and switching them back and forth. The other definition of fascism that's operative is somebody who believes ideas that were broadly shared by most people before 1900. And this is sort of what you get to when you get to like the Umberto Eco's definition of fascism. Umberto Eco is this brilliant Italian novelist who wrote this absolutely horrible article where he laid out this cluster of concepts that defined fascism. But the cluster concepts are so vague that they'd apply to almost all ideas before 1900, with few exceptions. And so by using this definition, you can say this. You can effectively say what progressives mean, but don't want to actually say. What progressives mean, but don't want to actually say, is everybody who has ideas that resemble ideas that come before 1900 is an evil person that is worthy of some amount of state censorship and vigilante violence. And that is the equivocation operation. And this, to the extent that this is applied to Charlie Kirk, it would effectively end all meaningful political discourse in the West that isn't just like some kind of weird toy theory debate.
Well, I heard a lot of different things there that I want to respond to. The first is like the question that you posed, which are this question of like, what is a valid conversation to have? That this is a conversation about conversations. Like, I understand when you're saying like what a valid conversation is. These are just conversations that like you think are useful to have, right? That's what you mean by valid. You don't mean anything other than that, right? When you say like a valid conversation, you mean one that you would like to have or one that you think society should have, right?
One that's allowed to occur within the parameters of liberal discourse.
Okay.
So that, you don't use extra, the dialectic occurs, and I'm not expecting you to phone my boss and get me fired or try to exert pressure on me. Like the idea, you could obviously say that the idea of sort of liberal open discourse is itself kind of a modern thing. But the idea is when we debate or talk about politics intellectually, it's supposed to be an open conversation where we can explore ideas as they exist.
Right. And in that context, I just don't understand, and maybe you're not applying it to the conversation that Paul and I had, but that like Charlie Kirk's ideas are beyond the realm of civil discourse, at least for me, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, what did you mean when you called him a fascist?
Yeah. So when I called him a fascist, I was clear about what I meant. I gave you what I meant by the term fascist. And you might say
that's the Umberto Eco definition.
Yeah. You might say that definition is wrong if you take some kind of like realist sense of what words mean or ought to mean. But I'm just telling you there's no equivocation, right? At all. So can we be clear about that? So I just want to finish. In my conversation, there was no equivocation, right? Because Paul asked me, what did you mean? I told him what I meant. And so there's no equivocation there, fair?
No, that's not true.
Okay, what's the equivocation?
Equivocation does not require the conversation you're in to have two definitions going on at once.
Do you think I was equivocating?
The equivocation equivocation to occur, it means you have to use a label for somebody that is radically different. Charlie Kirk is a fascist. Most people don't hear when you say Charlie Kirk is a fascist. Charlie Kirk was a conservative.
So I'll ask again, how was I equivocating? How was I equivocating?
No, I'm saying when equivocation is used, it means that the audience that you're speaking to is operating with a different definition than you're using.
That is not what I understand.
Okay, whatever. We can. Well, let's just be.
Wait. So no, it's not meta. I mean, if you're going to accuse me of being, or you're going to suggest that people are equivocating, I think Paul, frankly, was equivocating in that conversation because I was trying to to pin him down on what the meaning of the term fascism is. And so I certainly am not equivocating when I bring up the term fascism. You might say that my definition of fascism is stupid or it doesn't follow whatever, but that's not an equivocation. That's just you saying you have the wrong definition
of fascism.
What do you mean by testing it? What do you mean by test?
I want to see how it applies to people in history. So you said you have an objective definition of fascism.
I don't know what you mean by objective. What do you mean by objective definition?
You're not going to change the definition of fascism depending on what year the person was born.
If what you mean by objective is that the definition changes, no, the definition does not change.
Okay, so the definition is constant. So I could go to historical characters and ask you if they're fascist, right?
You could try some. You could try. Yeah. I mean, there are some concepts that are.
Okay, let's try it.
Well, wait, to be clear, you could maybe go back down to like caveman times where there are some concepts that are anachronistic,
famous leaders from history.
Okay, go for it.
Were they fascist? Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll do a mixture of white and not white leaders. Okay. Let's do Julius Caesar or Augustus Caesar.
I'm not sure. I don't know enough about Julius.
How about listen,
can we just stick on Julius Caesar for a second?
Okay, I thought you said you weren't sure.
Well, as I sit here, I don't have an instant response to Julius Caesar.
Okay.
Do you think I should have an instant response to Julius Caesar?
He's the most famous political leader of all time.
No, but like in the moment, I'm thinking out loud, like my thought process of Julius Caesar. Now, was Julius Caesar an ultra-nationalist as far as Rome is concerned? Maybe I don't know enough about Roman history there. Certainly authoritarian, right? He
Yes, he was, certainly.
Overturn Rome.
He abolished the Republic.
Abolished the Republic. Was he like sort of into conspiratorial myth making and mythologies? Not sure.
Yes.
Yes. Again, you might have a better understanding of Roman history, but what's your point here? What's the point here? Suppose that he is a fascist.
But if you let me go through, so okay, fine. Then Harun al-Rashid, the greatest caliph from Muslim history, widely celebrated.
I don't know who that is. I'm asking you, what is the point of this exercise?
The point of this exercise is I bet that your definition of fascism would apply to almost all famous great leaders of all time before.
I'm not sure. If it did, would it show equivocation?
It would show that you're using a definition of fascism that is so broad that it includes all ideas before 1900. That itself does not include equivocation.
Wait, so
but it makes me question. If you're saying if your definition of fascism amounts to looks like all ideas that were popular before 1900, then we can ask why we want to label all ideas before 1900 with this title that corresponds to this very specific ideology that comes from.
So you have this kind of like
Gentile.
You have this kind of like normative view of language. You think language has an words have objective meanings?
I've made no normative statements.
Yeah, well, no, but you're saying like, why would we want a definition that covers X, Y, Z? I'm trying to when I say this is the meaning of the term as I use it, I'm just trying to capture how the term is used. That's how I understand the meaning of a word. It's used,
well,
right? Do you agree with that? So what do you take the meaning of a word to even be?
The meaning, words can have multiple meanings. As fascism.
Yeah, I'm asking what do you understand like the word's meaning to be?
A word's meaning is basically. It's such an abstract question. It's a definition of a term as used in a particular community.
Yeah, it's usage.
I might need to make a follow-up here, Paul. Equivocation is when you have two definitions that are popular between different communities, and you use one definition, and then you present what you're saying in a way that makes it sound like you're using the second
I'm not
definition.
equivocating though, right? So I said that it's a cluster concept. I mean, I don't know enough about some of these historical figures that you're going to put up, but I imagine there are examples of rulers in the past who I wouldn't call fascist. That if you give me some time to think about pre-1900, I'm sure I could come up with some.
Yeah,
I don't know, like
difficult.
Voltaire. Think about John.
Was not a political leader.
John Adams was a political leader, correct?
Was John Adams
a political leader? Okay. Was he pre-1900?
You're saying,
agree. So here's John Adams. That's one example, correct?
I don't agree.
Why not?
I don't agree that there's any opinion that Charlie Kirk had that John Adams did not have that you object to.
Wait a second. We're talking about we're not comparing Charlie Kirk right now to John Adams. We're saying there's a concept.
If Charlie Kirk is a fascist by his opinions, and John Adams is not a fascist, then it's within my rights to ask you, what opinion does Charlie Kirk has that makes him a fascist and John Adams not a fascist?
So we can do that examination, but just be clear.
Yeah, I'm asking you that right now, Pesca. I'm asking you that right now.
Yeah, so
if Charlie Kirk is a fascist and John Adams is
John Adams was committed to the peace. I'll give you an example. John Adams was committed to the democratic transition of power. He gave power over to Thomas Jefferson when Thomas Jefferson won the election. So just be clear. Are you saying that John Adams did not give over power to the Republicans under Thomas Jefferson? Is that your position?
Oh, he did, and he also instituted a coup too.
He instituted a coup. This is the first I'm hearing of the John Adams coup. You're talking about the Midnight Judges Act?
Okay, so what was? No.
What are you talking about?
Well, he was part of this process. I wouldn't say that he was the primary force of it.
You just said a coup. What did you mean by coup?
Oh yeah. Give me a second. I'm gonna go look for it. What was the first government of America after the Revolutionary War?
Yeah, the Articles of Confederation was the first.
How did the Articles of Confederation get abolished?
There was a constitutional convention in Philadelphia.
Yeah, but a bunch of people stood up along with George Washington and the military and said that this government is over and we're going to rewrite a new constitution.
Every single state ratified.
Was there a vote to abolish the Articles of Confederation?
Yes, the ratification votes was a vote for that. Yeah. Wait. I just want to be clear. Do you agree, yes or no, that every single state that was a member of the Articles of Confederation peacefully ratified the Constitution? Yes or no to that? Will you answer the question? Will you answer the question?
Well, yeah, it is.
Yes, they did. Correct. Is the answer, Dave? Is the answer yes?
The answer is yes, but that does not mean that the abolishment of the Continental Congress was a democratic process.
It was the most democratic process until that time in history that had existed.
If you compared Charlie Kirk's views on democracy to John Adams' views on democracy, and you understood John Adams' opinions on democracy, you're aware that John Adams was against democracy, right? That he wrote against it. He thought that democracy was a bad system of government.
When I say democracy, I'm not talking about like the Athens, style of pure democracy. I think we're going to have this trouble, Dave, where words only mean like their most narrow thing. And
are you aware that
Dave, I just want to be clear. Like when I say democracy, I don't just mean pure democracy. Do you understand that?
There's no.
I'm just answering your question. Do you understand that when I say democracy,
yes,
I'm not just talking about pure Athens?
You asked me kind of these obvious questions.
Okay. But why would you raise that objection then? Like, yes, John Adams was.
Look, what in the abstract, you're saying that Charlie Kirk supported democracy less than John Adams is a ridiculous.
Wait, no, hang on. What did I say? I said John Adams was committed to the democratic transfer of power to the opposite branch of government.
I gave you one example where there was a non-democratic transfer of power.
I said that. No, I showed why that was not. Wait, I showed that
the ratification of the Constitution
was not democratic.
Would not have been accepted if you accepted if Trump abolished the Constitution and then without a vote. And then just held, months later, held a ratification for a new constitution. You would not consider that democratic.
If every single member of the union, wait, hang on. You would agree, wouldn't you? I mean, the Constitution provides for constitutional conventions within it.
No, it's not the point. You're proposing a different point. But the proposal is we basically completely disbanded the government, and now we're proposing a new one. So your case is that not agreeing with an election.
We did not. Wait. So the state governments continued in their existence. The state governments don't owe their existence to the U.S. Constitution. What was abolished was the federal government then existing under the Articles of Confederation. The states continued. Their governments predate the American Constitution. What was abolished through unanimous ratification was the Constitution. Wait, let me finish it. Let me finish my thought. Come on.
Go ahead.
What was abolished was the then existing federal form of government, and there was a unanimous among the states ratification of that process. Maybe you're willing to say right now, America, when I say democracy, I don't include America. Is that what you're trying to say?
Then I have no idea what that question.
Okay, if you're using the term democracy, to exclude the United States of America, you're just using the term in a different way than I'm using the term. So let's just clarify our terminology here. Do you include America, the United States of America, under the Constitution to be a democracy when you use the term democracy?
Which America? The America of 1700? Or do you consider the America of 1700 to be a democracy?
Yeah.
Or sorry,
1778?
1792 or whatever. 87.
So 1789 was the first year the Constitution was in force. So
but whatever. Is 17?
I asked you the question, Dave. I asked you the question. I'll answer it, but I asked you.
Is America a democracy? If I were to use the word, this is the problem. We're getting so wrapped up in these definitions. America is a republic that relies on democracy to more or less degrees. If I were to put, this is actually to Paul. Let's route around these endless debates about definitions.
Wait. Can you answer the
question? Hold on.
I'm trying to clarify this so we don't start just talking over every definition of every word. We can say this republic is more democratic and this republic is less democratic. And I think that it's unequivocal that America of 2025 is more democratic than the government of America in 1787. Now, Correct. If I were to put John Adams and Charlie Kirk in a room, and I went down the line of what should be put to a popular vote and how democratic a system America should be, Charlie Kirk would come out on the more democratic side of that abstract conversation.
In order for me to assess that statement, I need to know what you mean by the term democracy, correct?
Okay, so
Dave, in order to assess that statement, don't I need to know what you mean by the term democracy?
Okay, I thought we had a common definition.
Can you answer that question? I have to know what you mean, right? So when I was when I was pushing you on like,
wait, is that a question or a statement?
I'm asking you whether or not we need to understand each other. So when you say I think that Adams would be like more less democratic than Charlie Kirk, in order for me to evaluate that, I need to have some notion of what you mean by democracy. And that's why I was asking you the question: do you consider the United States system to be democratic?
Paul, I already pointed out the ambiguity here when we're comparing people between two different systems of government, between two periods, that America, without a date attached to it, I cannot say that. Well, let's look at a definition of democracy in the abstract. Democracy as a quality means that your government relies more on appeals to plebiscite and demagogic sounds pejorative. It relies more on plebiscite, aka voting, to establish power, and less on the administration of leaders independent of votes. Would that be a sufficient definition for you for democracy?
I think it largely tracks. I mean, I agree. Why don't we just clarify the term, and I'll just say that
that's okay. So in that case, my statement still stands.
Yeah. So, but like the thing is, when I use the term democracy in this context, I'm referring to our constitutional republic system here, and we can just substitute that in and just say that like John Adams was committed to the constitutional republican system of government in a way that Charlie Kirk was not, and that I think is then you
okay. Hold on.
All the entailments there.
Hold on. Okay, so Pisco, you said John Adams was committed to the constitutional republic in a way that Charlie Kirk was not.
Correct. In that,
what
for
specifically?
Example,
okay. What specifically would you say was Charlie Kirk not being committed to the constitutional republic in a way that John Adams was?
Sure.
You said the peaceful transition of power. Is that what it is?
By trying to subvert the results of the election in 2020, Charlie Kirk was undermining the constitutional processes by which the new leader is established in a way that John Adams accepted the results of the election of 1800 and transferred power over to his political rival and friend Thomas Jefferson. That is, I think, a key distinction that John Adams lives up to and Kirk doesn't.
Well, this is just a meaningless ideological distinction. So you could have you had identical views to Charlie Kirk, and just didn't voice an opinion about the January 6th protests, and you had identical views to Charlie Kirk. You would not be a fascist in your opinion?
Wait, so now you're...
It's only that.
No, that is not the case, right? It's not the case that I said that
for instance,
only commitment. I didn't say, and you know this, Dave, and you must know this, right?
That's why I'm asking.
So you know that when I was talking to Paul about fascism, that I gave the notion of a cluster concept, and that the meaning of the term isn't just with one necessary condition. You understand that?
Okay, so
insufficient condition.
Let's say that Charlie Kirk. I mean, I don't think that contesting an election via protest, even an illegal riot, is if not, then I'd say that what the shenanigans that were played with the Continental Congress and the Articles of Confederation were equal to that, if not more.
I think it's a wild statement, but let's test that.
No,
if Charlie Kirk advocated, we can test that. But like, so if Charlie Kirk,
hold on, because there's a lot of back. This is not the Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris discussion that I was on, but that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so because we are getting a lot in definitions, which is important. I do want to divert in a moment here to a substantive disagreement.
As much as possible, yeah.
Okay, but so as I'm following the conversation, so Pisco, one of the aspects of Charlie Kirk that warrant him being a fascist is the degree to which he supported explicitly or endorsed tacitly in whatever way January 6th and all of the stuff around that. Okay.
Yeah, the attempted theft of the election. That's one.
Right. Okay. So you hold on real quick. You said it's a cluster phenomenon. So let's put that aside momentarily. What other beliefs of Charlie Kirk would fall into the cluster of fascism?
Yeah, I think I provided them for you in our conversation. They include ultra-nationalism. I can't give you on a scale, the edge case, this kind of Sorty's paradox of when nationalism gets into ultra-nationalists. But I even think that, Charlie Kirk and everything he stood for, people wouldn't even say that they wouldn't ascribe to that ultra-nationalism. They were shooting off like fireworks and American flags everywhere at his, at the memorial service that he had, or I don't know, political rally that he had there. So ultra-nationalism is there.
American flags.
Ultra-conservatism. I think that anti-communism. I think you guys wouldn't disagree that is part of the clusters that at least as the definition I gave.
Let's stick. Hold on. Let's stick.
John Adams were in the modern world with his opinions about the restriction of the franchise that he spoke about, and his positions about, the importance of religiosity to government and all the other 18th century ideas that pretty much everyone believed back then. You would say that's not fascist?
I think it's harder to say. I think there's probably some anachronistic, this concept that we're using is a little bit more difficult to apply back in time. That's why I'm a little bit confused at the exercise in the first place, Dave. I mean, you're saying, you're basically just saying your definition sucks or something like that. But like, I don't understand. Like, I'm just trying to track how the term is being used by people. You can make the same objection with the term democracy or good or bad. I mean, these are concepts that sometimes need more grounding out. But it doesn't mean that people aren't using the term in a way to track what the meaning of the term is, as I understand it.
I think that most people just use the two ways that I see fascism used is to stand in for almost all ideas about how government should be run before 1800 or 1900 or whatever. And then the other definition of it, the Hollywood definition, is it's a bad person who needs to be suppressed in some way, either by government or by vigilante violence.
Well, I don't agree with that.
Hold on.
I don't.
Okay, hold on. Because to be fair, Pisco, we already had this conversation. We went into we can get into the philosophy of language some other time.
I think we actually bottomed out on that beautifully, right? I think that's perfectly fine. I think we established that, I guess we established that, fascism really basically applies to just following the procedure as it is when it comes to transitioning power in governments.
Wait.
Well, hold on. No, stop. Yes, because hold on. Okay, hold on. Pisco, you pointed out there's a cluster concept. So that one aspect was the not committing to the peaceful transition of power. So I want to dig into these other aspects, okay?
Well, no, but can we just recognize what happened? What happened was, so I guess we just grounded it all down to, if you're not committed to the procedures of transferring power, that's what fascism means. There is no honest rendition of that conversation where you come away thinking that, Dave. And so I want you to retract that, actually.
Can I propose something?
Yeah.
Can we just clarify what you meant as opposed to relitigating,
No, wait, hang on a second. So I was giving you examples, and you asked for ways in which John Adams was more fascist than.
I'll clarify what I'm getting towards.
Do you want me to finish what I'm saying? So you asked for ways in which John Adams was, less fascist than Charlie Kirk. I was coming up with some, and your summary of that entire exchange was that Pisco's definition of fascism is just when you don't follow the procedures of, transfer of power. That's insane. That's an insane summary.
Okay, hold on. Dave can reply, and then I want to narrow in on something here.
The problem is that if we talk about people like George Washington or John Adams, these are all part of the same party of people. And you're telling me that it comes down to things like ultra-nationalism and waving flags and fireworks, which was part of your additional cluster concepts. All of those things, if you transported these 18th, 19th century people to America, they would be more like that than your average Republicans like Charlie Kirk.
I don't agree.
Hold on. Go ahead, Dave.
This is what this is the concept that I'm trying to communicate, is things that that are labeled as fascism routinely are ordinary political beliefs from the pre-modern world.
Okay.
And that fascism operates as kind of a thought terminating cliche to keep these ideas out. Now, if you're telling me that if I had the ideas of John Adams in the modern world, in addition to his, his you call it nationalism, he had very strong feelings about his Massachusetts pride and his pride in
not as a nation. Wait, so it's so funny you say that, because George Washington, famous for being incredibly loyal to Virginia, loving Virginia, calling it his country. These founders were all more loyal to their state than they were the notion of U.S. nation. That really emerges out of the Civil War. Same thing with Adams, which you just talked about. He was incredibly partial to Massachusetts, and talking up all of the framers and the patriots from Massachusetts and its impact. And so, these people are patriots and national, but not in the same way where they
but
characterize.
By that definition, by that definition, Abraham Lincoln is an ultra-nationalist and Robert E. Lee is not.
Yeah, but okay, but I think that there are other concepts as well that we can, you can try to, again, I think that you can say that Abraham Lincoln is a nationalist in a way that John Adams isn't. But again, I was just addressing your specific examples. You're like, George Washington, John Adams, they're all the same. They're not, right? Their notion of nationhood is much less ultra than Charlie Kirk. And you would recognize that, wouldn't you?
You're a bunch of people. That was a very quick
John
question.
Adams, George Washington compared to Charlie Kirk. Who's more of a nationalist between those two?
It depends. If we define nation as the individual colony, then I would say that John Adams and George Washington were more nationalistic than Charlie Kirk. If we make some kind of moral distinction where loyalty to Virginia or Massachusetts is somehow morally different than loyalty to
I'm not
the
talking
United
normative
States,
anything. I'm not.
Stop. Hold on. Pisco. Let him go.
But do you see, Paul, where the confusion lies? I don't see if somebody is willing to shed blood and die for Virginia, and you're saying that because Virginia is a state, not a nation, then that means that he doesn't qualify under ultranationalism. Then ultranationalism becomes kind of this weird property, like it applies to polities that have a certain size or something like that, and that isn't.
Yeah, hold on.
It makes it kind of useless for modern comparisons, right?
I'm
or
seeing
for usage in politics.
Yes. Okay. I'm seeing again. This is and it degrades into definitions, and at what point, can you be ultranationalist towards a state versus a country? Charlie Kirk is obviously not ultranationalist towards a state, but and I guess because you said ultra conservatism as well, Pisco.
Yeah.
And maybe that's more fruitful than nationalism.
Yeah. Well,
the
last word on nationalism is you're basically saying the notion of a nation is an incoherent concept at that point. You're saying that like what a nation is who can say what a nation is? It's this abstract thing that like what does it mean?
Didn't you point out that you could have a nation as the state or the country?
I don't know what conversation you're referring to, but I'm doing an internal critique of what you just said, which is like, could a nation be a state? I guess so. What a nation could be anything. It depends what you mean, but normatively by nation. Of course, I'm not talking anything about normative here. I'm just trying to track how the term nation is used, and it's meant to understand a broader community than just a.
A nation. Colony. A nation is a broad group. Is like a people. Like the Chippewa Nation was not a state, but it was a people. Mm. So you can have like the Virginia nation, you could say,
saying, like,
and
any
the United
problem,
States nation state.
All I'm saying, Paul, here, and I'll go to conservatism, is the objections you're raising with respect to ultranationalism are just objections you can raise with respect to nationalism or the notion of a nation at all. These are all the same kind of Swordy's paradox where, what's a chair really? Or like, what is a man? What is a woman? Like these categories, sometimes they include difficult cases, easy cases for sure. And sometimes it's more of a binary, right? But like in terms of what we're talking about here, just because there can be edge cases doesn't mean that there are clear cases. And it just feels like all the objections you're raising are like, okay, I guess nationhood as a concept is just incoherent. We can't understand it.
Okay,
I'm pretty sure that if I brought John Adams into 21st century American politics, almost all leftists would call him a fascist.
Okay, well, the audience can decide on that thought experiment. Let's do ultra conservatism.
Yeah.
Okay.
Conservatism, I take to be is somewhat of a relativistic concept. I mean, conservatism.
Okay. Perfect.
That is a concept that is going to change and morph throughout times, and it has to do. Traditionally, it comes. This left-right paradigm from the French Revolution and all that stuff, and but in different contexts, conservatisms can mean completely different things.
So,
typically,
you say that Charlie Kirk was more conservative than John Adams?
I don't know if, with respect to their individual views relative to their time, John Adams was far less conservative. No, that's what I mean.
At the outset of this conversation,
I take conservatism.
This definition was not going to vary.
No, the definition doesn't vary, but concepts contained within it could, right? Like conservatism. Don't you agree? Don't you agree that conservatism?
Okay, hold on. Stop. Let me narrow in on this.
Just said, if a definition is invariable to time, then the concepts within that definition have to be invariable.
No, wait, hang on. So
just logically speaking.
Okay.
No.
Hold on. Wait. This is. My whole job now for the next hour is just to pulling out of semantics and getting the substance.
Okay. Yeah. Please, Paul. Thank you.
Okay. So hold on. Pisco, you said ultra conservatism is one aspect of Charlie Kirk's fascism, or the degree to which he's to be called fascist. What is a particular belief that Charlie Kirk has put forward that you would describe as ultra-conservative? socially, I presume.
I think that I think it's both as relates. I think it's more to do with socially and culturally conservative, I would say.
Okay.
As opposed to economically. I don't know how economically conservative.
I don't think the discussion is economic. So what is a belief that Charlie has put forward that you would regard as ultra-conservative?
By what I mean by the term conservative. What I mean by the term conservative is relativistic. And you can fight me all you want on that, but that's just what I mean by the term. Do you have a problem with that?
Well, you're telling me that the term fascism is that, in that case, relativistic. Since fascism rests on conservatism, and that's relativistic, and
it doesn't necessarily rest on.
Okay, hold on.
It's not a sufficient or necessary condition.
Again. I'm just asking. I'll ask the question just high level. What is a belief that Charlie Kirk has put forward today that in the way that you describe ultra-conservatism, using the whatever definition you have that you used to define the cluster concept of fascism? What is a belief that Charlie Kirk has put forward that you would describe as ultra-conservative?
Yeah, relative to the time, to currently, right? He is conservative, ultrally, in the sense that he believes in a sharp alignment of the sexes. For example, he believes that the sexes, very, very traditional roles, women really shouldn't be working, and that is conservative relative to this time.
Okay, now hold on. Let me ask you this though.
I mean, you know what my response is going to be, Paul, right?
Well, go ahead, Dave. Go ahead,
you can find founders who all supported, basically two systems of law, the coverture, the doctrine of coverture.
You're not going to find a father that had more.
But hang on a second. But I just explained, Dave. I just cut through. I understand where these conversations go. I cut through that by just telling you that the notion of conservatism is indexed to a particular context. Don't you? And I'm asking you, what's the problem with that?
I asked, because, Pisco, when I started this conversation on fascism, the first thing that I asked you is that we do not index the definitions via time, that we objectively evaluate people's opinions and not say that we're going to discount people's opinions because they come from earlier times. I think and this is the fundamental thing. And, to get to the substance, Paul, right, that the thing that I feel the word fascism is doing is it's essentially trying to terminate our consideration of political ideas that are old. So when we have a political idea that we consider old, like any of the ideas that John Adams had about democracy or social organization or religion, all we say is, oh, look, people from the early 20th century believe that. Therefore, that idea is part of this cluster concept of fascism. And to most viewers, that means that it's not worth considering because that's how the equivocation works. Because there's two definitions of fascism. One loose, very relativistic definition is used because you admitted it relies on conservatism, and conservatism is relativistic. So therefore, the overarching concept is relativistic.
Can we pause right there, please? Yeah. So it's just because of but it's not a necessary or sufficient condition to describe. Conservatism, I don't take to be a necessary or sufficient condition for how the term fascism is used. You have, for example, Nazis.
You listed conservatism as one of the
clusters. Wait, but the notion of a cluster concept, I mean, that like none of them are necessary or sufficient conditions. I can give you an example of Nazis who were quite progressive in their social values and gay, and they had sex with men. So I don't take fascism to necessarily entail some kind of social conservatism. It is one of the clusters for sure, 100%. But let's just cut through the crap. Don't you agree that tradition is a relativistic concept? Conservatism is a relativistic concept. Agreed? Yes or no?
Okay, hold on.
No, hold on. I'm speaking to the original question, Pisco. This is just a logical thing. So in mathematics or law, if I was to provide a definition of X, and X relied on ABC, and any one of A, B, C were relativistic, then the definition of X would also be relativistic. This is just a property of language. I don't know what to say. I work in math modeling. This is just a quality of the subsections of a definition will apply to.
Okay, hold on. Stop. Because again, substance here. So Pisco, you pointed out Charlie Kirk's ultra-conservatism is, you said sharp sex differences, or what specifically? So, can you elucidate that?
He expressed beliefs that stressed incredibly traditional female gender roles, in essence, and I gave an example of that, which is that women should stay out of the workplace. That's
okay. Now, do you regard that as a bad belief?
Whether I do or not isn't the discussion. I understand, right?
No.
This
is an open discussion. I'm very interested in the fundamental. I'm trying to avoid the semantics and get into the substance.
I want to note. I do want to note that the conversation about whether I agree with that belief is not the same as whether or not that's a conservative belief.
Fine. Okay. Pisco.
I think you would all agree. Would you all agree that this is a conservative belief?
Of course.
If conservatism
traditional
means
like
anything,
sex norms, yeah.
So the notion of something being conservative it inherently is a relativistic concept, and you haven't at all disputed that. Right?
Okay, stop. Hold on. Stop. Because Pisco, you're doing a lot of optics right here. I want to note this. I want to note that. I said specifically stop. Yeah, right. I also meme too, Pisco. I want to get to the substance. So actually, what you think about good or bad belief is the entire point. I don't care about semantics at this point. We've already had a semantic conversation. Mm-hmm. So I want to know on the substance, because we're trying to figure out what is the right path forward in the world.
I don't agree with an austere dedication to traditional gender roles and women's place in society. I don't agree with that. I don't think it's good.
Okay. I believe that traditional roles, on average, tend to be healthier, although I feel that society should have leeway for exceptions. Okay. I think that my view would probably correspond to Charlie Kirk on that point.
Yeah, and you would agree that it would be a conservative view, because conservative necessitates...
But is that ultra conservative, what Dave just said?
Ultra is one of these other, primitives that's an intensifier like very, which just means, some degree of beyond... what I would take to be the average view, and I do agree that Charlie Kirk's conservatism is beyond the average, and so that's what I understand ultra conservative to be. And again, so sure. in order for something to be, and just like the concept of ultra or conservatism, ultra is also indexed to a population, right? Someone's ultra conservative might be someone's progressive in a given age, and again, you guys are not contesting that, because obviously conservatism, to the extent that it relies on tradition, to the extent that the tradition is changing or how long the tradition has been established, will affect whether something is considered conservative.
Okay, sure, yes. So, but you said what Dave just said about traditional gender roles being healthier. You don't. That's not ultra conservative to you, correct, Pisco? What particularly did Charlie Kirk say that you would define as ultra conservative but not conservative?
So, I think that believing that there could be a benefit for women to adhere to certain gender roles, I don't take that necessarily to being an ultra conservative view. What I take to be an ultra conservative view is this notion that it should be buoyed by the state, for which categorical exceptions need to be made that Dave is referencing here, and also to the extent that you're advocating it as like a necessary thing to be a good woman is to be in the traditional roles, and that basically the exceptions are very, very, very minor. And so the ultraness, I think, is being added to either when it has the imprimatur of the state, or when it's being essentially very limited, the extent to which someone can consider you a good woman. And really the only exceptions are people who are nuns or masquerading or influencers.
Can I pose a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
So, using that definition, I think we would agree that almost all times before 1900 would be ultra-conservative because they believed in this traditional role. And they also believed that traditional role should be buoyed by the state.
So, no, not necessarily. And I explained why, right? And
I'm interested.
We're going to have to deal with it, right? So, I'm telling you that what I understand conservative to mean, necessary and indeed ultra conservative, are indexed to particular times and particular groups of people. And I'm asking you, what does the concept of ultra or conservative mean independent of that? I don't even understand what those concepts would mean if they were independent of a society or independent of a temporality. I just doesn't. Those terms,
words don't mean anything independent of a society.
That's what I mean.
You brought up the term conservative in this discussion, Pisco.
Wait, Dave, wait, hang on a second. But you're objecting to the term conservative being indexed to a given set of people or time. Are you objecting to that? I just want to be clear on that.
No, not necessarily. Okay. I want to be clear. When we use a label and the label sounds scary, what I'm putting forward as an accusation, Pisco, is that liberals and leftists like to use scary labels for ideas they don't like, even though the idea is common throughout history and common to a bunch of people that we would consider very good people, including some of the people we would consider the best rulers of their entire society of all
Well, let me
time.
give you an example, right? So Theodore Roosevelt, by the standards of today, right, is a raging racist, is ultra conservative, but how is he portrayed as this progressive, right? His whole movement, the Bull Moose Party, the Progressive Party, is fostered on the notion that he is not a conservative, that he's in fact progressive, the antithesis, and that like lack of coherence, or that lack of it just means that you're not understanding the term. The term is indexed to a particular time, and so Theodore Roosevelt, by now standards would be conservative, but by then standards would not be. I think you would agree with that.
Yeah, but you see, when the word means something different and indexes to times differently, this is what opens up the path of this equivocation. And what you do is you hide ideas that are actually fairly normal and fairly healthy for human societies behind this stamp that does not really mean anything in the context of the time that we're talking about.
What's the equivocation?
Or that. So, for instance, like saying that people should have traditional norms. This is a, or you could say like, what would we call it? Like sex complementarity, or whatever you want to call the traditional way of arranging families. This is something that is common in history. It is not unusual in any way to hold this opinion. And almost all great leaders that have ruled their societies have held this opinion. Now, when somebody comes onto a college campus and they promote this idea and they get hit with a label, the college students don't think, oh, wait, that label applies to almost all of these great leaders that I admire. They disconnect it because of the very ambiguity in language that you're talking about right there. And, we probably should move on to substance.
But slavery is common is common in history, and was a lot of great leaders practiced slavery, and a lot of great leaders enslaved the people who they conquested. Just because we're not having a discussion, I thought, on like how often particular beliefs are held in history, or how often, or whether it's good, these beliefs, just because they've been held by a lot of different great leaders. We're trying to understand what the meaning of a term. This is basically, unfortunately, another semantic conversation about what we mean by these terms. And
okay, we're going to move on to substance. Okay. And I would say, in part, Pisco, that's because you're making it that way.
No, it's in.
And I specifically said to both of you, this is going to be open-ended and not around a particular proposition in semantics, so we can move on to that. Go ahead.
So I was happy to engage in like, what do you think is happening in the discourse? Why are the left bringing this up? Why are they trying to discriminate against these classes of people? Are they using it in the way that David's implying, basically to signal people for terrorism or acts of private violence or justice or some kind of thing? I'm happy to have that conversation if you want to have that conversation. But if you start accusing me of equivocation, bad faith using of a term, that is necessarily going to, for one, I'm going to defend myself, and two, it's going to turn on the meaning of these terms.
I'm not personally accusing you. I'm saying that that is how the term is used. And the reason why I want to be careful with throwing around the label fascist is because I know that that's how it's used. So if you were to accuse someone of being so if I were to go back in time and go into McCarthyist, like 1951, and I was to say, like, I know that so-and-so is a communist, and like I got him fired, or I got him on a blacklist. And then when I asked, what did you mean when you said he was communist? Oh, it's a cluster term meaning vaguely on the left. Like that would be kind of a shitty thing to do, right? The thing is that what I'm just trying to say.
You say that, but like, wait, hang on.
Hold on.
You say that.
Wait. Let Dave finish, and then you can finish, and then I want to move on to a different substance.
It would be kind of interesting to debate slavery and liberalism, like the substance of that quality, if you want to segue. I'm just saying that we have to be careful when we use labels that have known social consequences.
So,
And
for
because
example,
that has a way of terminating ideas.
well, it's funny you bring up communism. I agree that there's like this kind of looseness that people use the term communism, but that hasn't seemed to stop anyone on the Catholic right of the, I don't know, the political ideological sphere. Hasn't stopped conservatives from using the term communism, even though, it's not being used in its most narrow sense. People are, for example, saying that Mamdani is a communist. I'm sure you're not using the most narrow sense of the term communist. He doesn't identify as a communist. And for this whole
is he a Marxist though?
he identifies as a democratic socialist, same as AOC or Bernie. I mean, you can call
He does not call himself a Marxist.
I don't think that he calls himself a Marxist. I could be wrong about that.
You know more
but,
than me, though. So, okay,
I could be wrong about that, but like, I'm not really in a place. Well, I'm joking because I do have these conversations, but like, I find it funny when people start saying like, "Oh, you're too," or the left is too loose with their terminology. That is a claim itself that's going to need to require a semantic understanding of what these terms mean. That's number one, and then number two, look who the fuck is talking. Trump called Kamala Harris a fascist. Do you think he's labeling her for like extrajudicial violence when Trump called Kamala a fascist? And everyone seems to ignore that.
That is a dishonest tactic. Yeah.
What is?
Like
when Trump does that? Is he calling for violence on Kamala Harris when he calls her a fascist?
He's calling people to dismiss her opinions without listening.
But he's not calling for violence against her, is he?
I wouldn't say so, not directly.
Okay. So when the left calls people fascists, they're not calling for violence against them, correct?
Well, I would say it varies, but I did say that he's definitely saying that you shouldn't listen to what Kamala Harris is saying. She's just this bad word, right? And the bad word is, whatever, right?
Wait, why is it more ambiguous when the left uses the term fascist? They could be calling for the violence of someone, but when Trump does it, he's very clearly not calling for violence against Kamala. Can you explain that?
What do you mean? I think that he is calling for Kamala to be disqualified.
I'm not saying disqualification. I'm very clear. You're not. I'm asking about violence. When Trump is saying that Kamala Harris is a fascist, he's not calling for violence, is he?
Like, this is like a technicality. I don't know. He's asking for her. He probably wants her prosecuted. I'm
talking about violence. I'm talking about violence, not prosecution, not disqualification. Violence. Is Trump calling for violence when he calls Kamala a fascist?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Is Trump calling for violence when he says lock Hillary up or something like that?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I think it's more or less the same spirit, if that's the case.
Okay. All right. Wait. So when Trump says Kamala's a fascist, you don't think that he's saying violence, but when left calls Charlie Kirk a fascist, you think they are, right?
I think hold on.
Again, this is all the semantic stuff. You're comparing Trump to the entire left. It's all case by case.
How is it semantic? How is it semantic? It's not semantic.
Because we're arguing about how one specific case of Trump saying something versus the entire left. Again, these are not, I'm trying to pull substance out, okay?
Yeah.
I want to move on.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Let's move on.
We'll see how fucking semantic this goes, okay?
Yeah,
Dave, in our conversation, you said, the Constitution is a ridiculous document at this stage.
Yes.
People are talking like it's 1880, where people actually believe that the Constitution limits government.
Yes.
It doesn't. Do you want to elaborate on that? And then, Pisco, you can reply to this idea.
Yeah. So I'll bring in, maybe this is not going to, I hope this adds more light than it does heat. But John Adams very famously said that the Constitution was only developed for religious and moral people. So the idea of these constitutions is that there are certain legal understandings of morality that are universal throughout society that we hold in common and that we have as a common basis for a society. Without those assumptions, the Constitution doesn't mean anything. Furthermore, the whole idea of the Constitution to begin with was to essentially limit the power and scope of the federal government. Over the last 200 years, almost all of the protections against the expansion of the federal government in this dimension have been undone or caveated out or amended out. And so you arrive in 2025 with this document that was written ages ago, and people are arguing over what it means on issues that were not what it was intended to cover. And there are some things like you could say that the Constitution is the reason why we have better protections of freedom of speech here than we do in the United Kingdom. But all of these countries, from Liberia to the United Kingdom, they technically have constitutions that say they have freedom of speech. It's just that their legal court system just gives exceptions to it, right? So, I mean, what really holds the freedom of speech in place in this country is the belief by our judiciary that we have freedom of speech, not the words on the actual paper. And as we move further and further away, as we become more diverse and divided morally, the words on the paper are going to mean less and less and less and less. And people will argue that the Constitution gives them all sorts of powers that the fathers would have never thought it covered. And for that reason, this document it still has a little bit of use because our judiciary believes in certain core concepts of restraint, specifically around the First Amendment. But once we pass this generation and people can't agree on what is speech and what is violence, then this will do very, very little to actually protect us.
Okay, Pisco, you are free to respond to any of that on substance.
I see ideally a lot there. I mean, I think it's a little bit of an ahistorical look in terms, for example, of like the state of the country right now, as though like we've never been more divided or we've never had more bigger disagreements. I don't agree. I mean, like the Civil War, we fought a civil war about whether we should own people. Where we were literally dividing the country in slave states,
which the
and
Constitution
free states.
allows.
And
hold on, Dave.
It did allow. It does not anymore allow, except for the proviso in the 13th Amendment related to crimes and stuff. But in general, like we were way more divided there on an issue of grand moral question about whether it's okay to own people. And so even just looking now, I don't think we're in this apocalyptic state where we're near the end of the usefulness of the Constitution. I think even Dave just said at the end there that there's a usefulness now in terms of our judiciary with respect to the First Amendment. I think these concepts and values do have purchase here. And it's not just the freedoms as outlined in the Constitution. That I think is a myopic view of what the use of the Constitution is. It's the structure. It's the division of responsibility. That's why Trump is such a threat, is because he is trying to unify all federal power behind the executive. That's the real protection against the encroachment on these liberties. The judiciary does, I think, at times a notable job in defending those freedoms. But like, look at the results. The results have been America has produced the best art. America is the strongest country in the world, is an economic powerhouse. And yeah, I don't think there's any reason we should give that up. Even under Trump right now, the standard of living is going up and up and up. And in terms of like these moral differences, I don't know, maybe you're implying racial differences or ethnic differences. America has been able to grow stronger in the past through some of these waves of immigration, to say nothing, like, the waves of Chinese immigration in the 1800s, Irish immigration, Italian immigration. And the whole point of the Constitution is having a forum where disputes are resolved via debate and conversation and not through the use of arms. And in that sense, I think it's working well, and it should be continued.
Do you want me to?
Please. Oh, see, this is the Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, long-winded. We can
we're just
get ideas out. Exactly. No. Fleshing out things.
I don't actually know your ideology. Maybe you're a libertarian. Do you consider the centralization of power that was done, under Lincoln or under FDR to have been in the sense that you are using, the Constitution as a guard against the centralization of federal power? Were those strikes against what it was trying to guard against, either in the 1860s or 1930s?
I think that the Civil War is pretty exceptional circumstances. I do think that there was a fear there, especially as relates habeas with Lincoln. And so there, I think that there's a potential. I haven't really done a deep dive on the arguments there.
What about the 30s?
And when we're talking about FDR, there, he's backed by the massive majorities in Congress, Democratic Congress, and so I don't really see the same danger of centralization. The bigger danger there, I think, so far as the federal government is concerned, or the rights infringements with respect to Korematsu, et cetera. But like with Congress giving like a stamp of approval on all these New Deal things, I'm less concerned because these acts are being authorized by the legislative branch.
But that's interesting, though. It seems like you're saying that if there is buy-in from Congress and the popular vote, then the centralization of federal power is The founding fathers would disagree with this, certainly, but the centralization of power is not dangerous if it comes from a consensus of the three branches of government.
Well, no, I'm not sure what you mean by that. So if Congress,
well, you said that there was a overwhelming Congress, which there was, that supported.
But you said the founding fathers would not agree that with what I just said. I mean, what part do you think they disagree with?
They would disagree that they would see the centralization of power into the federal government as being naturally dangerous, whether or not it was supported by a majority of the people. As a matter of fact, in their writings, they are very, very, very afraid of just this thing occurring.
Sorry. Maybe there's a confusion. I'm talking about the centralization of federal authority. Maybe you're talking about federalism with respect to the state and federal government relationship. I'm talking about Congress.
No, I'm talking about the centralization of power into the federal government.
More generally.
Which FDR did, right? Which the founding fathers were very worried about. You agree, right?
To some extent, though, but like the Constitution was expanding massively federal power. I mean, that's why they were called Federalists, among other things.
Yeah, I understand. But one of their concerns was this would go too far, right? That's why
they put in protections and they put in separations of powers, and that's the structure. But they're not going to say, like, the government needs to be vigorous. They didn't want a useless government. They just put in structural protections.
But they were very concerned that it would go too far, right? That they would overshoot the Articles of Confederation. They would get a centralized tyranny, right? They were very concerned.
The Anti-Federalists were more concerned. The Federalists were reasonably concerned, but some of the leading Federalists wanted more, like George Washington, to be something of a king. So yes, they were. Opinion varied depending if you're talking about Madison, if you're talking about Washington himself, Hamilton or John Jay or any of these people. But like in general, they were fearful of overreach. Yes, that's why they put in the structures that we have.
Okay, and they did not think that buy-in from popular vote made this concern go away. They did not think that because the population of the country supports this move to centralize power, this means that the centralization of power is not a threat.
I think you're saying, so there was a fear of tyranny of the majority, for sure. That's one of the reasons why you don't vote directly for president. You don't vote. It's the states who assign their electors as their state legislatures commands them to, and that's why they, for the longest time. But just so you know, just my response to that is their fear of democratic input is also found in the structures that they put in place in the Constitution. And to the extent that they were fearful of democratic overreach, that's imbued in the Constitution, both in the structure of the Constitution and the individual rights, which are protections against majoritarian overreach. So that's all there. It's all incorporated.
Okay, and they would have regarded moves like FDR did to be a huge threat to that concept.
I'm not sure. I mean, the specific moves that he did, I'm sure they'd be like, wait, what the fuck is Social Security? It's hard for me to get in my head like what they would have thought of those specific enactments by FDR. It's the same kind of thing.
I think you have your answer right here, Paul. Right? If we can't even ask what the writers of the Constitution would think about FDR, why are we asking what the founding fathers thought about what we're doing right now? Either the words of people who lived 250 years ago have some kind of moral weight on our decisions right now, or they do not.
This is sophistry. Come on. I mean, you would never say this of Jesus or the apostle.
Wait,
hang on a second. So you wouldn't say. So I'm not saying
we were having a nice discussion.
I'm not saying that the framers' words. I'm not saying that the framers' words have no meaning now. But you're asking on a level of granularity for which I cannot give you a historically accurate response. I can try to think of what they might thought. The better approach, I think, is to take a look at the values that they actually enacted and what they thought of those at some level of generality. But you're asking me specific questions. Like, it would be like saying, what would John Adams... Wait, let me just finish this thought. What would John Adams think of the internet, dude? What do you think of that? I'm like, I don't fucking know.
No, well, we're talking about a particular action of government, Pisco. So, I mean, like, if the Constitution were to have meaning, right, we would have to be able to entertain this question, Paul. We would have to be able to entertain this question. What would the people who wrote this document think about the current legislation we are considering right now?
So name some legislation from FDR.
In the case of FDR,
what legislation?
About huge number of pieces of legislation that centralized power into the federal government, which was one of the main things that we know that the founding fathers were worried about.
Let's talk about
now,
it.
we have to be able to ask whether the founding fathers would consider that good or bad when they wrote the document in order for the document to have.
You just said
okay. So yes, Pisco. Yes, hold on. Yes. So Dave, what is a specific piece of legislation that you would cite as the biggest example of? Here's an example of power being centralized that you think the founders would be very clearly against.
I mean, almost all of them. Social Security obviously would be, the Works Administration almost obviously would be, the Tennessee Valley Authority obviously would be. All of these things violate the 10th Amendment as stated in plain language.
Okay, all right. Let's pick. Hold on. Which of those, Pisco?
Wait. Why is Social Security? Why would social? So, and also just be clear, the Constitution has changed since the founding generation, and it needs to also now be updated based on the Reconstruction Amendments and others. So we just don't go by the specific founding generation. But what would be unconstitutional about the Congress paying for a pension system?
The 10th Amendment. But
Paul, I need to clarify wait. What rights is it in? What rights are being intruded on?
The 10th Amendment.
Yeah. So the 10th Amendment is thought of as a first of all, it's big questions about whether or not it's even operative text. It's just reflecting the structure of the government, and basically says all power.
I think we should get to.
It says all powers not delegated to the federal government are reserved for the people or the states respectively.
So is that a delegated power of the federal government? No. So it's
no. The spending. Wait a second. Wait,
hold on. Let Pisco go. Let Pisco go.
You want to move off because you know you're fucking cooked. So this is the
All
power.
right. Yo. Okay, Pisco. See, hold on. Pisco. I specifically said this is not the bullshit I'm looking for. And now you're saying you're cooked and all this shit. If he's cooked, then let him cook. Don't just fucking call it out.
But why is he trying to move on as fast as possible? So when you pay for something, there's a specific provision of Article 1 that talks about when you spend money for the general welfare. Congress is allowed to spend money on shit. And with respect to raising taxes, guess what? We have an amendment that lets us tax all incomes. So there's a specific amendment for taxing that. So I'll ask again, what aspect of that is unconstitutional or violates the 10th Amendment?
Okay, Pisco, but calm the bullshit. Okay, please.
So, Paul, in the spirit I'm asking this, I'm assuming that we are interpreting the 10th Amendment as the people who wrote the 10th Amendment meant it, Paul. So that's the operative assumption that I'm working on, right? If I can make up what they meant and say that they meant something that they obviously didn't mean, then I could say that the 10th Amendment meant whatever I wanted it to.
Okay, so let's drill in on Social Security and whether or not it violates the 10th Amendment as the founders intended. Dave, what is your argument that it did violate the 10th Amendment as the founders intended?
This is, not my original point, but broadly, it's not enumerated as a power to set up a bureaucracy for handling retirements. If you wanted to do that by the founding fathers, you can ignore them if you want, right? And I'm not saying you should, but I'm saying if you brought this legislation to the founding fathers and said, can the federal government do this, set up this giant bureaucracy? They would say no. Either that has to be an amendment or the states have to do it because of the 10th Amendment.
They would be divided.
Hold on, wait, let Dave finish and then Pisco, you address that.
I'm finished. You can say that the founding fathers meant that the Fourth Amendment meant abortion rights and all this stuff. It just, once we can put words that people from the 18th century would obviously not have meant into their mouths, then again, the document is just a pile of words that you can rhetorically stretch into whatever shape you want it to. And I don't see any point in caring about a document that can be stretched that widely.
Okay. Yes, that's the excess stuff. So Pisco, on the question of, does the 10th Amendment, is Dave right that, did the founders intend that if a power was not enumerated in the 10th Amendment, that if the federal government wanted to do it, they needed to change the Constitution?
Yeah, so there are, at that level of generality, they did think that it was a constitution of enumerated powers. So the 10th Amendment is just reflecting the structure of the Constitution, which is the mere fact that you're listing out powers implies that all other powers you don't have, right? Like, why would you need to list powers if the Congress, like the states, just had general legislative authority? And so the 10th Amendment is just reflecting what you just said at a level of generality, that yes, the framers here, Madison and others, believed that it was a government of limited powers. On the specific question of would they have authorized a vast sweeping bureaucracy, I mean, they might have had a different mind on that. There was a big debate over the first national bank, which kind of operated in this weird way. Hamilton certainly thought it was constitutional. Madison and Jefferson railed against it as very, very unconstitutional, right? And we both think of those as, both Madison and Hamilton as very informative in terms of the founding framers. Now, how the first national bank was structured, very different than how the Social Security Administration is structured. It's hard to think about like what these framers would think about the specific bureaucracy at issue here, but there is the necessary and proper clause in Article 1, which basically said that Congress can do things that are, you know, in some level of proximity and degree to its foregoing powers, right? So, for example, the power to institute a national bank is attendant to the power to prevent states from taxing that bank. The power to tax is the power to destroy. And so just because at the level of granularity that Dave is suggesting here, it doesn't say Congress can provide for a Social Security Administration, because it's not a civil code. It's a constitution. It grants broad, sometimes with words that who the fuck knows what they mean. They need to be elaborated by courts and stuff. But that was the intention of the framers. What does free speech mean? That was going to get clarified by the courts. And the framers were smart people. They were lawyers. They understood this. So yeah, there are some broad delegations of authority here, and certainly encompassed under the spending power is the power to provide for like retirement, like just to pay money to pensioners. I mean, I'm sure that the first Congress was doing that with respect to veterans. I don't know why it would think to be unconstitutional in the modern era.
I will have to leave this as a contention, but if you, as a historical fact, think that the founders would have endorsed those New Deal's policies under discussion, I just think when you need to study that period of history more. Look, fine. I mean, fair enough. Let's say that you can just, if the Constitution does not limit the creation of an indefinite number of large bureaucracies that print and spend money, then I think the Constitution does not really limit the centralization of power in the federal government. If the federal government is allowed to create large, gigantic entitlement bureaucracies, fund them with printed money, and then hold that money as part of the reserve currency scheme we have through the Federal Reserve, I think that the Constitution's ability to limit government is pretty much moot. It's rendered completely moot by that.
I mean, you reality. Say that, but we have more freedom than China. We have more freedom than Russia. We have more freedoms than most of the Western world. And so, if you're doing a comparative analysis here, it seems like America does pretty well in terms of encroachments from. Trump is trying to undo that with some of his authoritarian
freedoms,
overreaches.
You mean the First Amendment ones, right?
No, I don't mean just the First Amendment. The Fourth Amendment as well, the unreasonable searches and seizures.
First
amendments,
okay.
Certainly gun rights. Would you agree with that, right? America protects gun rights more than other places. In terms of due process and equal protection, in this country, you have the right to a jury trial. You don't have that right in other places in the Western world. In this country, you need to have unanimous jury. You don't have that everywhere. In this country, you need to have notice and opportunity to be heard. It'll pay for your lawyer if you're indigent. So it's just nonsense to think that the Constitution is not providing actual protections to real people who use them every single day. You're giving up what's most valuable about the United States if you say that.
But this is, Paul, this is actually to my point here, right? So we saw in our previous discussion that what other liberties might be that we might have been able to preserve in 2025. The founding fathers' objective to stop the centralization of power into the federal government was more or less rendered obsolete by subsequent modifications of how the federal government operated, largely through these entitlement programs and the Federal Reserve banking. So my point is simply this. My point is that there's huge swaths of the Constitution that are basically dead letters, even though they haven't been amended out. And there are some things that are very much active letters that are in the Constitution, like freedom of speech. My statement about these things is that it is not the presence in the text of the Constitution that guarantees these things. It is the decisions and the attitudes of our judicial rulers who guarantee these things. A great example is Great Britain, right? I mean, Great Britain, or I guess it's the UK, or I guess this is Britain now, or the UK. Let's just call it the UK. it technically has freedom of speech written into its governing documents. They sent more people to jail for memes than Russia did in the last year. These things, you can write down that people have freedom of speech. If it's not believed by the administrators, it really doesn't make hella beans difference. And this is what I'm saying when we talk about the erosion of our beliefs and the things that make the Constitution worthwhile. It comes from the erosion of the common understanding of morals and values, right? You can look at, say, for instance, the young people. Young people believe a lot less in freedom of speech than they do, than previous generations did, almost any time in the 20th century. This lack of belief will start to erode away our defense of that legally once those people get into power in the court systems.
They are in power. The people who don't believe in the First Amendment are the MAGA Republicans and authoritarian Catholics who are trying to reach power. People, for example, like the Groypers and Nick Fuentes, who don't give a fuck's or a rat's ass about the First Amendment. They don't care about all of what Trump is doing now, shitting on the First Amendment. It's so funny you bring up the UK and Great Britain with respect to the First Amendment. Yeah, we divided. First of all, the notion of the First Amendment and free speech derives in part from English common law, but in the English system, Parliament is sovereign and the king is sovereign, right? Like these are the entities from which power emanates. In the United States, it's the people. We have a different conception of where power emanates, at least officially, by our founding document. You can laugh and scoff all you want, but our document recognizes the sovereignty of the American people, and our First Amendment tradition has widely diverged from the UK, from Australia, from all these other countries. It's not even close. From Canada, it's not even close. And that's because ideas do matter. Ideas matter. Like, I don't know where we got this notion. This is like Sam Harris was arguing about this back in the day about Islam and the difference between Islam and Christianity. Ideas matter. People act, yes, they're just words, right?
Beliefs matter.
People hold, but the ideas that people believe matter, and the people in power, to a certain extent, having bad people in all of these positions, you're just going to get fucked. That, I think, is what's happening with the presidency right now in America. But as long as people continue to believe in these good ideas and not buy this siren song of ethnic nationalism, Catholic nationalism, Father Coughlin and the Catholic right. I mean, I think as long as we adhere to our principles, I think we'll be fine.
Can I have permission to take this conversation in an interesting direction?
Please, yes.
Can I
Go
cue
ahead.
something up? I actually kind of agree with that to a certain extent, and I agree that when free speech falls, it will not just simply be from the left, it will be both left and right simultaneously taking it down, because it will be sort of a prisoner's dilemma, as in all things. But when it comes to freedom, freedom is meaningless unless you determine freedom for what, right? What is when we say someone has freedom, we know that the state needs to limit some of their activities and it needs to enable other ones. And if people cannot agree on what is the good life and what a person's life should be directed towards, it's my understanding that their belief in freedom will not match up. A great example of this for me is drugs. I, among a lot of other right-wingers, do not believe you have a right to ruin your life with drugs. But a lot of leftists do believe you have this right. If the two moral perspectives on what a good life looks like differ, then the ideas of freedom will also differ as well.
Yeah, I think that people can have different disagreements on what are the freedoms that matter and what rights are worth preserving. I certainly don't go as far as saying that people have a right to recreational drugs. I don't think that that necessarily means I'm in favor of making it criminal, but I think there's a difference between making something criminal and making it illegal versus do you have a negative right to not be intruded on your ingestion of recreational drugs. I've never held that position, and people could have different disagreements on that, whatever, right? My whole point is the Constitution isn't the Ninth Amendment in the Constitution recognizes that just because we enumerate some rights here in the Constitution doesn't mean that they're all the rights that matter, or that we're not trying to disparage other rights that may exist. And that reflects the kind of natural rights philosophy of a lot of these framers who are deist, or they believed in this notion of natural rights. And so just because the Constitution doesn't protect it doesn't mean that there isn't a right to it or there ought to be a right to it. But what the Constitution does do is it gives us a system by which we can navigate these disagreements on what are the right rights, what should be, activity should be curtailed. It gives us a great framework for that, where we don't have to resort to violence, individual private violence. We can give the state the monopoly on violence, and we can sort out our difficulties through peaceful means. That's what I think is so useful about the Constitution. It's not that it's a perfect document, not that it neatly lays out all of our rights perfectly. Of course it doesn't. It was flawed at the start, ab initio, totally. But that it's a useful, structured framework to order our society. And look at the results. We are the strongest country. We are the most powerful country. We have some of the best art in the world. And you want to give that up? Why?
I mean, the best art in the world was created by, Italian despots in the Renaissance, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not so sure I'd use that as a basis of government. But
you'd rather look at those paintings than like watch Game of Thrones?
Well, if it's between
I'm joking.
That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of stuff. Yeah, that's fair.
This is a joke. That's a joke. I just don't think. So the mechanism for resolving moral disagreements is voting. I mean, you can just look at this. When it comes to how we arrange our society with regards to sex and drugs and allocating resources, if there's one thing that we've learned, it's that voting does not resolve issues of fundamental moral systems. What happens is, like, it used to be that a lot, like, people would argue over a tax, and then the tax would get passed, and then they'd stop arguing about it after the election cycle. But when it comes to fundamental moral issues, the conversation can never stop. It just keeps on going, and it keeps on getting hotter and hotter and hotter. And a great example of this is things like sexual liberty or drugs or any of the innovations that we've added into our society post the 60s. These things were all heavily guarded. There were moral, what we would call kind of sexually moral laws in the early Americas, obviously, and most other countries highly restricted drug use. And once all of these things become kind of active debates, or once the system starts managing education, right? How does there can't be any debate over what moral system is taught in education. The government manages education for the most part in this country, and no one's ever going to agree to have their enemy's moral system taught over theirs in a publicly financed education system. And there's no such thing as morally neutral education. So what happens?
But who says that there's such a thing as morally neutral education?
I said that. Well, I mean, there's lots of people who say that, and I would endorse that opinion. Yes.
You think that you said it yourself, right? Like, even just selecting what to teach at what time is an editorial choice of some kind, right? Like,
no, that's what Dave is saying. Yes, you guys.
But like, I'm saying, like, who thinks that education isn't norms based or?
Okay, well, hold on.
Well, it would have to be, because you've got an active culture where no one can agree what moral system is taught.
Right. Yes. Hold on. We're going to all agree on that.
Like a tax that people forget about after it gets passed. It becomes an active sore point for each side when they lose, and so the controversy never tapes down.
But Dave, hold on. I want to ask you directly, just on this, like, specific, like you brought up drugs. Okay, so let's in terms of pure practical politics, to the degree that you differ with Pisco or whoever, like anyone, what do you think should be done to address, like, the free use of drugs that, or the more free use of drugs that we have now than what is ideal? Like, is there particular legislation that you think needs to be passed?
Yeah, we need an absolute crackdown on drug use. These people who are killing themselves on the streets, where in the various towns I have lived in, they need to be sent to institutions to detoxify and also be treated for their mental illnesses indefinitely until they're better. And we need to get all of the drugs off the street by whatever means necessary.
Okay, let me ask this is a principled question, just a matter of principle. If it was the case that cracking down on drugs practically just didn't work, like the war on drugs was a failure, we know that. If it was the case that there was no practical enforcement of no state mechanism that you could to enforce people to not use drugs,
would you still ban it? It's a good question.
Yeah, what would your attitude be? Or do you just think this is a ridiculous question?
If it led to horrible consequences and didn't even help the drug problem, would you still be in favor of it? Basically, is your support for banning drugs Okay, right. Okay.
It's 100% depend on it working. Yes.
Yeah.
If you told me with perfect clarity that cracking down on the drugs would lead to more drugs, then I would be against cracking down on drugs.
Okay, now
the state just takes the action to remove the problem.
Okay, so let me ask you then, just broadly, given that we have done like a war on drugs, and to my limited understanding, it has been a failure. Why don't you think there's reason to suspect that the state cracking down on drug use would be lead to failures, given that it has historically? Or do you think there are things that we're not doing that we need to be doing that haven't been done before?
In all cases that I have seen, where look, there's a problem coming here that our culture is collapsing, and when cultures collapse, they're more vulnerable to drugs. A great example, and I don't mean to ramble, but a great example is like opium in China. Like China had disintegrating culture in the 19th century, was super vulnerable to opium, but then when the strong governments came in the 20th century, there's like no opium problem in China anymore. There's other problems, but not that one, right? And so, because our culture is in this degenerate state, we're very vulnerable to drugs. My opinion is not that government crackdowns solve the problem. It's just that they marginally make it better. And the amount marginally they make it better is worth the cost of doing them in almost all cases.
Yeah. So in response
to that, Pisco, you disagree?
I do, but it has more to do with the other collateral consequences of that kind of crackdown. That's number one. Is basically, I think it's a giant waste of money, and it will involve the same kind of rights deprivations, right? Because I'm assuming if to crack down even more than what we've been seeing so far. And to be clear, Paul's right. I mean, we've seen massive efforts by the government in the last 100 years to crack down on drug use, using police officers, criminalizing that kind of stuff. And so I imagine any kind of like increased effort is going to massively expand government bureaucracies, and it's going to massively increase spending, and it's going to involve, getting around those pesky little probable cause and warrant requirements to go after drugs in that sense. Those consequences don't seem worth it to me. Yeah, go for it.
You don't think it's worth, where I used to live, there were just several people who were obviously killing themselves with all of these new drugs, these post-fentanyl drugs that have come on the scene. You think it would be a waste of money to take that person and forcibly put them into a rehab clinic where they'd be gotten off the drug?
I didn't say that in that specific case. I think it would be a waste of money. I said that the other, the rights deprivation, I don't know how you would calculate that in terms of the amount of money.
Well, you're violating the person's right to use drugs, certainly. They don't want to go to these facilities. They want to go out and use fentanyl.
If you're criminalizing their conduct, I'm not sure. You have to value a life there, and like what the court processes are, how much it costs to have police to pick them up.
I'm speaking normatively.
Normatively, all else equal, if it were, costless to help this person by putting them in a treatment facility, I'm not sure.
If it costs what it costs, you think that the cost to put them in a treatment facility is too much of an expenditure.
It depends.
Material cost or cost in terms of deprivation of other rights? Which cost are you referring to, Pisco?
I'm talking about the total cost of the enforcement package that Dave has offered. He's now localizing it to a particular individual. For a particular individual, if you knew you could save their life, wouldn't it be worth spending some amount of money? Yeah, sure, but not infinite, right? You wouldn't be in favor of $1 billion to do this kind of program per person, right? So there's at some point, I'm not sure at what the cost passes that threshold, and you're going to have to price in the potential rights deprivation. But I can't, as I sit here, give you like where that cost becomes not useful anymore. But it's at some point, right? Wait, Dave, right? You agree? Like if it were $1 billion to save that one person, you would never be like, that's okay, right?
Only when it gets to the case where the impact on the federal budget would cause more harm. But it would have to get pretty high for that to be the case, considering how many billions we waste on other things.
Well, that's what I mean. It's like whenever we look at these policies, it can be easier to have like a stylized example where it's just one person and we're doing the trade-off, and then we basically have to calculate the worth of a life, and that's going to depend on the specifics of the individual. Is that person young? Are they likely to be recidivist? Like I'm not able to calculate that right now.
Can I make it a little bit more sharp here?
Yeah.
If we were to institute the regulations we had on mental health and drug usage that we had in the 50s, where people could be basically committed to mental asylums for exhibiting the behavior that's regularly exhibited in towns like Berkeley and San Francisco and New York, if we implemented and enforced those laws, we would immediately be able to take an enormous number of people off the streets who are obviously killing themselves.
I think that there is some space for, I want to be clear, I think that there is some space for mandatory, I don't know if you want to call them asylums or mandatory detaining people who are a risk to themselves, but it has to reach a threshold and there needs to be a showing. It's not enough for the government just to allege it. And because I'm so jealous and guarded of the rights of individuals to be free and live their life in general, I'm again, I want to stress, I'm not saying that you have an individual right to consume recreational substances. I'm not saying that. But in general, I am concerned about encroachment by the state. And so even though I can see a world in which I would support mandatory, state facilities for certain levels of mental illness and certain levels of, your danger to yourself and others, doesn't mean that I will for all the cases you're talking about. And it will have to have an evidentiary showing of some kind to some arbiter. That's not just...
I understand the concern. And I'll put it this way, and this is an interesting perspective, Paul, to bring it back to our original point on liberty, the way people from the 18th century would have imagined it. If I were to take people from the 18th century and show them, like George Floyd, they would say, this man is enslaved to drugs. And George Floyd was a slave, and he was a slave to fentanyl. And a cruel master it was, because that master killed him. If George Floyd had been incarcerated against his will, or been made a serf and put under a king that would take the fentanyl away from him and force him to work, that would have been better for George Floyd than having his entire life enslaved to this horrific substance. And so I question, in a reality where people can have their liberties destroyed by drugs, what it means for someone to have a liberty of individual choice to exist in this situation. And
that's just an equivocation,
though. We're the freest country in the world. If we're the freest country in the world, and a certain percentage of our population is killing themselves on drugs, that is not a free country, in my opinion.
That's just an equivocation on what we mean by freedom and liberty here. So you can think
it's not equivocation; it's a different definition than you're using.
Well,
I'm not.
I think that would be an equivocation by definition, right? Like you're basically saying the framers.
No, hold on. It's an argument between positive and negative freedom, right?
Yeah,
Dave is using the positive freedom, and you're using the negative.
No,
I'm using an older concept. He's using a newer one. I don't think he's clearly thinking fits into the positive negative, but yeah,
he's thinking of some liberty, which kind of presupposes a free will of some kind, or some kind of notion of like your true self and what your true self wants.
Liberty, yeah. I mean, this is I guess it's sort of an Aristotelian. Maybe I don't want to butcher Aristotle here, but it is a liberty that has it's morally ordered, and this is what the kind of liberty that people in the 18th century would have thought of as liberty. It's not license to do whatever you want. It's liberty to pursue passionately, like a good life of your own
right.
vision,
So it presupposes a notion of what a good life is, and it presupposes some kind of like natural inclination or some kind of free will like some kind of libertarian free will that's independent of these substances, that no one could freely choose to decide to take these drugs in a way that they would not be quote unquote enslaved by that. And so it's not a notion that I think I truly comprehend. I don't even know if the notion makes much sense to me. But it's certainly not what I mean when
does it not make sense to you? If I were to say people are enslaved, how does that concept not make sense to you? These people's lives are dominated by this thing. The dreams they had as children are being destroyed. It's destroying their families.
Well, I agree with that. Well, no, I agree that it's having negative results on them. I just don't understand in what sense they're not free.
Hold on, wait. And I want to cross
definitions here.
Yeah, and I want to end with maybe one potential point of agreement after this. But when someone says this person is a slave to drugs.
Yeah, they just mean that their life is having a bunch of deleterious effects from drugs, and it's limiting what they're able to do. But again, when you have a sense of freedom, it's like that notion is like you get to choose what you want to do, and when you choose drugs, it's not really you choosing. That's the kind of the problem I'm running into is separating the choice to do drugs from these other choices in a sense of freedom.
Qualitatively different. Older thought had a more holistic view. It was a morally guided liberty. So I mean, and it's not just about limiting choices. Like I got married, right? By me marrying my wife, I limited my ability to sleep with other women, right? But that's still an act of liberty to marry her, right? You have the liberty to marry. That is a part of ordered liberty, because it is part of the things, you know, that would be considered morally virtuous actions that you could take to create a life for yourself.
Paul, that's what he means. It presupposes some virtuous set of
good.
things.
Yeah,
right?
yes.
It does.
Right,
It's
yes,
not under
yes.
contention. It
Yeah.
absolutely
Yes.
presupposes
No, I'm
morality.
I'm just.
I'm not disagreeing with
So
it.
I'm just clarifying that this kind of like stance, independent, objective morality is not something that I truly understand.
I know. We
Yeah.
talked about this in our conversation.
But
Okay, hold on.
But I'm contesting that you can have a moral, independent notion of liberty that isn't just implicitly ridiculous.
Well,
That's fine. Well, hold on. Moral philosophy. We'll go down a metaphysical route that I don't want to go into.
Sure.
Okay. So hold on. This is a clarifying question, Dave, from the last conversation we had, and I don't know whether Pisco will agree or not. But you said you are not a nationalist, correct?
Yes. This is so
Okay.
funny. You asked me this.
Yeah. So Donald Trump is a big nationalist, and a lot of the MAGA and like Nick Fuentes type right figures are calling themselves nationalists. So, Dave, why don't you agree to the term nationalist, or what do you have against nationalism?
The reason why I'm laughing at this is because when you had the conversation with Pisco, you said, is there something you agree with fascists on? And Pisco said, the thing I agree with fascists on is their opposition to the old like imperial aristocracy. And, you know, the conservatives, the sort of like blue-blooded conservatives.
Which they were, right? They were.
Yeah. They were. Yeah. It is my opinion that the blue-blooded conservatives in Germany and Austria would have been a better choice for Germany than Adolf Hitler. And I'm copying that opinion from my grandparents, but that is my opinion, and that is one of the reasons why I am not a nationalist. Hitler is a great case study in the failures of nationalism. Nationalism, first of all, I mean, we're talking. I want all ethnicities and groups to thrive. Look, I am very concerned about African Americans thriving, which is one reason why I'm so anti-drug. You know,
Anti what?
Anti-drug.
Anti-drug.
Drug.
Okay, yeah.
Drug. I think we agree that drugs have maybe had some deleterious effects on the cohesion of the African American family.
Sure.
And I absolutely want these people to have a future, and I think that is the responsibility of governments to be like, I am your ruler, and this is the future that you have as various people that make up my nation. But the thing is, once the nationalism comes into play, what happens is, and this, I'm not, people aren't, not all right-wingers agree with me. This is, a lot of right-wingers love nationalism. What I feel is it creates a situation where the best, you start fighting these battles for this concept of the people that is totally detached from the actual good of the people themselves. It's just tied to this political project. The what we call the political formula of the state becomes tied to this hypothetical concept of ethnicity. And I feel that this has caused a lot of problems. I felt that this drove a lot of problems inside the Third Reich. If you go back to earlier forms of government, like the Habsburgs, which were, you know,
multi-ethnic empire with a lot of different.
Yeah, I mean, they ruled a multi-ethnic empire. They didn't have to they waged a war. They might have waged a war against Russia over territorial concerns, but it was not like this total state racial war in the name of the folk, because they understood that they had all of these little patchworks of things, and they still had to take into consideration ethnicities. There were certain ethnicities that were more friendly to them and more hostile. The Serbs were very hostile, the Hungarians were neutral, and the Germans were very positive on the Habsburgs, generally speaking. But what I admire in those governments that are, I'm sure Pascal would call them authoritarian, is that they were able to kind of bring together this patchwork of people and allow all of the people to thrive and not fight and kill each other, or get into these cosmic wars of continental domination, which I see as very, very destructive, and which I see Hitler, the fascist nationalism, is very much driving.
I wanted to respond to that. I think it's super, super interesting, because usually you are seeing among the right the nationalistic types, and you have a lot of people recoiling at the notion of like a multi-ethnic political constituency or political unit, whatever you want to call it. I would be curious to ask Dave, not right now, but I will ask you at some point, what he thinks defines the American nation or the American people. If not the Constitution, what is it? If you're not going to go by this kind of like ethnic solidarity, which I think he's right to reject in the American context. And really, I don't think
I can answer that question.
Oh, yeah, go for it.
Yeah,
I was gonna say we'll wrap up in 15 or so 20 minutes. So maybe this is a good one to end on.
Now the conversation's gotten interesting.
Yeah, right. Well, it's my fault for allowing the first 40 minutes to happen.
We had 40 minutes of arguing over language, and now we're finally getting to the interesting philosophical, political concepts.
Right. I've learned my lesson to start with this in the future.
Well, no, it's fine. It's fine. It's cost of doing business for these things, isn't it? America is really, America is really a group of ethnicities and religions that for a time operated under a single government and have been kind of moved around a lot. America is defined by a lineage of creedal beliefs, mostly religious, but also pertaining somewhat to this mythological understanding of the Constitution and these weird mythological ideas of the founding fathers. I respect those beliefs. I'm very skeptical of them, as you might have gathered. And that is the concept of America. It is not one group of people, it is many groups of peoples. Although I think in the 20th century, you could squint your eyes and say that there was an American white ethnicity and also an American black ethnicity. But I don't think there's ever been like one American ethnicity. And what do you think is the definition of America?
I think I think it's totally not I would say totally, but like largely a product of the traditional American history and the American Constitution. So the United struggle to throw off the yoke of the British and the American constitutional tradition and the people that uphold that history, those beliefs, that Constitution throughout the course of time. I think that's how I view the American project. What I think there's some unity on us is, or I'm just curious, why does that not commit you to some version of open borders or letting all different groups of people inside the country?
I told you that America comprises a finite number of ethnicities. It's not defined by the Constitution.
Would it include like the Chinese?
Well, that's one sub-ethnicity that came in the early 20th century, I suppose. It's not the same.
That's what I'm saying.
The
like,
lost, certainly.
It seems that if there's no sense of America that is grounded in there is some kind of like shared historical myth making that you identified there, and I agree it has to be vague to capture what the term of the American nationhood is, I think, accurately. But if we're not grounded in particular beliefs or adherence to the Constitution, it feels like America is just like a landmass that can change based on different immigration patterns, and that its core features, there's no consistency throughout time and space. And I'm
that's
curious,
a problem if you don't believe that there's core ethnicities.
That's what I mean. So why aren't you in a collision course with all of these immigration hawk peoples? Well, like why aren't you?
I am an immigration. I'm for virtually no immigration. I don't think there should be any virtually no immigration at this stage. It's ridiculously deleterious to the core groups that made up this country and formed it over the course of its history.
So hold on, let me ask Dave: is there because you said the American identity is basically a finite set of sub-ethnicities? Is there any uniting feature to like all of these sub-ethnicities that can be described as American? Is there some through line that would apply to all of them, but not other ethnicities of the kind that weren't necessarily allowed to immigrate?
This is you've got to the core problem. Of our age, right? There used to be a common set of moral understandings that we all held in common for a few reasons. It's because traditional religions that were in existence in America all had, with some exceptions, more or less the same set of moral beliefs. There was very little divergence. And because the ethnicities also were very close. I mean, I'm German, Germans and Anglo-Saxons aren't that far apart ethnically. Now, what happened twofold, there's two things that happened. There was a cultural revolution in the 60s, and then there was a massive expansion of immigration. And now we have so many different peoples with so many different highly divergent moral systems. It's hard to say what our common unifying moral ethos is. For instance, like if you compared me, right, like a Catholic, I might, my family is very new to this country, very new, probably even newer than yours, Pisco. I don't even know what background you are ethnically, but I'm going to bet that my family is newer, or at least my father's side.
I'm first generation. I was born in this country,
Okay.
but my family's from Peru.
Well, I was born in this country, but my father was born in Europe.
Interesting.
So I have a little farther back on my mother's side. But either way, right? What do I have in common with Ilhan Omar? And what do we both have in common with like a trans activist like ContraPoints? It would be very difficult to find, if you went through Europe and picked a random European that was like, a median beliefs, they probably would have more in common with me than Ilhan Omar. And if you picked a random Catholic from anywhere in the world, but, let's restrict ourselves to the Northern Hemisphere, they would probably have more in common with me than ContraPoints, the YouTuber. But for some bizarre reason, ContraPoints and me and Ilhan Omar are all Americans. That definition is so broad that it comprises almost all.
But it does comprise you.
Ever.
You think you would identify as an American. You think it does include you. My question is like, why would it include Catholics? I'm not religious.
It didn't used to. No. Well, it kind of did a little bit, but not very much.
But if you're open, and if you think it's good that it includes Catholics, surely you think that it could, right? It is good that the American identity now includes Catholics, right? That is good.
It came at a huge cost to the ruling class when they admitted my ethnicity.
No, but is it a pro tanto good overall? Is it good as you understand?
Certainly.
What kind of good?
It was good for me at the expense of them. Yes.
No, but do you have a notion of good? Like under your notion of good, whatever you think ought happen, right? What you think ought happen. Do you think that it's good under what you think is good that Catholics are included in the American identity?
I don't think that I'm part of the American identity in the way that someone from the Mayflower is. That's what I'm
not saying that it's exactly the same.
There.
I'm asking, to the extent that Catholics are now included as part of the American nationhood, that concept, is that good? Should that have occurred?
Should that have occurred? That's a strange question. I think it may definitely cost.
Let him answer. Go ahead.
It's weird, Paul, because this is essentially what happened. When the generations in the 19th century let people like my mother's generation and the Ellis Island wave in, they immediately made the identity of what it meant to be an American and what it meant to be a Virginian mean a lot less. And in exchange, they got the ability to essentially colonize the western half of the United States. That was a trade. That was an exchange. And, I pray that the right decision was made and that the WASPs, they got more benefit in terms of the economic power of America than they lost in their cultural cohesion. But that counterfactual in an absolute sense is very difficult to answer, I find.
Wait,
Sure.
So you don't have an opinion on whether it was good to include Catholics as part of American society? You don't have an opinion on that?
He just okay. Hold
Catholics were included as a.
I'm not asking descriptively. I'm
restricted right.
Wait, hold on. I have a question.
Normatively, I'm asking normatively.
Yes, Pisco. He just explained it was a trade-off, and it's not obvious whether the trade-off was worth it.
So I'm repeating the question to make sure it's clear. You're not sure if it was good to include Catholics as part of the American nation?
I'll put it this way. I believe that Catholics have a responsibility to assimilate into Anglo-Protestant
I'm not asking whether they have a duty to assimilate. I'm asking whether or not you think it's good.
I'm misunderstanding the question, Paul.
What do you think it's good that Catholics were included as part of the notion?
Okay,
of
hold on. We just did it. All right. We just.
Come on.
Yeah, because I'm interested in the ideas, which is what.
No.
Oh my God.
So this is.
We were having such a good time, and now we're going back to these lawyerly debate tactics.
Lawyerly. I just want to get.
It is.
I want to get clarity on the view.
Can I ask Pisco what am I? Can you put a little more finer point on it? Certainly historic occurrences happen and they cause some good and some bad, right?
Yeah, I understand that sometimes occurrences happen, they cause some good, they cause some bad. I'm asking you a normative question, not historically descriptive. Was it good? Because you can look back at things in the past and say good or bad, right? You can go in the past and say Holocaust bad, right? So it's not this like I can't comment on history, right?
Yeah, but some things are like, this was a big problem, and it created a lot of good things, and it created a lot of bad things. And I'm afraid that if I say that this was good, it will mean that all elements, you'll confuse that with me endorsing all elements of this trade.
How about this? I ask you as a net positive.
Yeah, is it a net positive that Catholics were included as part of the American nationhood?
I think barely, under the provision that Catholics assimilate into WASP culture in all aspects other than their specifically confessional religious beliefs.
Wow. That's tough, because you're basically saying it's good for Catholics to convert, right? Like, why should they?
I just made that an exception.
Yeah.
I said,
other
than their explicitly held confessional beliefs. And by the way, one of our founding fathers was a confessional Catholic that was completely WASP. It was Charles Carroll from Maryland, which was the Catholic colony. So this was always the deal with Catholics. Now, would the founding father have wanted millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of Irish to come over? Obviously not, right?
But the Catholics,
I would like to think that they would hold the same standard for the Irish that they did for the gentleman from Maryland who signed the Declaration of Independence.
It seems a little bit like weird to like one's religiosity, to the extent that these are devoutly held views with respect to Catholicism. How do you divorce that the confessional aspect?
Yeah, hold on. Let me ask this. This is what I was gonna ask. So when you say WASP kind of culture, I vaguely have an idea of that. But like, what is an example of a cultural practice, the non-confessional part, but a cultural practice of the Catholic, that you're talking about, that is at odds and needs to be assimilated to? Yeah.
Do you know William F. Buckley?
Yes.
Do you know how he talked?
Yeah, but he's a Catholic. It's funny you bring up him.
Yeah, but we call that accent mid-Atlantic. The accent like, hello there, whippersnapper, let's go.
Yeah, it's like transatlantic, right?
Yeah, it's mid-Atlantic accent.
But he's the exception. He's not the rule. Most Catholics don't sound like.
Hold on. Yeah, hold on.
Oh, my bad.
Go ahead.
Look at this if I finish the story.
Okay.
Now the question is, why did all of these Catholics talk this way in 1950? The mid-Atlantic accent comes from the 1890s and the 1920s. Well, the reason why is that all of these Catholics that went to Ivy League schools, they got this record and they trained themselves to speak that way in an attempt to assimilate into the ruling WASP class. And once they were there, they saw their job is to take other Catholics and make sure they adopted the norms of this WASP class. Now, a lot of Catholics say, and this is a legitimate contention, that in assimilation you lose part of kind of like your spirit that's part of your core confessional reality. But that was sort of the deal that was concocted, and that was the trade-off. And just like there was a trade-off for the WASPs who let millions and millions and millions of Catholics into their country, there was a commensurate trade-off for the Catholics that had to operate inside the fundamentalist.
Okay, hold on. Pisco, hold on. So Dave, an accent seems very innocuous as like some cultural clash. Why would it be so damaging that someone comes in with a different accent? I mean, if that is there a more practical, like, here's a cultural practice that the Catholics engaged in that would have undermined sort of WASP culture that needs to be assimilated besides an accent, because that seems sort of superficial.
Well, I mean, it symbolized a lot of other things, right? I mean, I don't exactly know what spirit you asked it in, Paul, but I'll tell you, a lot of the unassimilated Catholics that came over inside in the 1870s and 1860s, they kept their identity to the extent that they were still waging a war against Great Britain in the name of Catholic forces in Ireland. And a lot of this persisted, and this was considered to be an incredible faux pas. So the divided cultural signifiers indicated a divided loyalty, because the cultural signifiers cannot be separated inside humanity from divided loyalties.
But the confessional ones can. They can be.
They cannot. Well, see, this is the proposition, right? This is the proposition of America, and this is the real risk. They cannot be separated. Absolutely cannot be separated. The founding fathers, to an extent, believed that the way they had set things up would kind of silo off these confessional differences in a way that would make sure that they would not explode into a huge religious war. They were very aware of that. And it is actually my opinion that eventually these religious differences boil to the surface and destroy the project.
Then in what sense are you a member of the Catholic right? Because if you're suggesting that your Catholicism shouldn't play a role in American society at large, except to the extent that they're privately held confessional attitudes and dispositions, in what sense are you advocating for any kind of Catholic right-wing project? That would seem to be at odds with your notion of what Catholics ought do, which is to assimilate into WASP culture.
But WASP culture does not rule America right now. I would feel bad if I were like promoting traditional Catholic social teachings in a WASP country. Right now, it's ruled by a bunch of soulless technocratic bureaucrats that believe in nothing and that are atheists. I would much rather have a Protestant ruling class, and the Protestants would much rather have a Catholic one.
No, but I'm just asking, are you advocating for Catholic style anything as a political project in America? Because
all laws have to be based on some fundamental moral system. I would prefer that moral system be the Christian one, and if I had my druthers, which I probably will not, it would be the Catholic variety. But I think that there's enough space inside the small differences that exist, not large confessional differences, but small political differences that exist between Catholics and Protestants. I believe that we have.
This is the contradiction I'm trying to elaborate. Maybe it's not a contradiction. You can tell me. If what you're suggesting is that the best outcome, which is that the Catholic version of whatever political project you're advocating for takes hold, if that happens, that would be good, then how can it also be good for Catholics to assimilate into the Protestant paradigm? How can both of these things be good unless you're just saying like they're both better than where we are now?
Well, This goes back to the fact that you're actually highlighting what I said earlier, that when the founding fathers invited the Catholics in, they were inviting the weakness you just pointed to into their country. And they said that the economic benefit of these immigrants would overwhelm the weakness. So I want to say that I agree with you that this is a vulnerability in society. I'm just saying that this vulnerability can be overcome if the religions in question are close enough. If they're just like from completely different planets and they've got nothing in common, then good luck, because I have no idea. A constitution is not going to stop a religious war if the people can't come to some kind of very baseline agreement on what the good life looks like morally.
So in that context,
you can't agree on that.
It's funny because we're talking about Charlie Kirk, and Charlie Kirk, he was a Protestant, married a Catholic, as far as I understand.
The good life.
And yeah, but talk to me through that. Talk me through the Charlie Kirk experience, because he married a Catholic. Does this show the interoperability of the different religious traditions? Because what occurred in Charlie Kirk's memorial, whatever, that didn't seem very Catholic to me. It just seemed to
it was very interesting, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it was
talk me through that.
Fascinating anthropological experience, wasn't it?
Talk me through
that
it.
will be studied by future generations.
Talk me through it. I thought it was pretty sinister and weird.
What you see is first of all, Catholic and Protestant marriages have been incredibly common, even during the big wars between Catholics and Protestants. Charles I was married, who was an English king who was notably Protestant, was married to a Catholic woman. It's happened all the time in history. So it's not something that hasn't occurred historically. The thing is that what marks Charlie Kirk is so different from his enemies or his opponents, whatever you want to, let's say opponents because we're being friendly, and what makes him. When you look at Charlie Kirk and his wife, you see two people who have a very similar understanding of what the good life is morally. When you compare Charlie Kirk and ContraPoints or Hassan Piker or Destiny, you see two people who have very different opinions on what the good life is. So, the fact that Charlie Kirk may have believed that the Eucharist was a symbol and his wife believed that it was the physical presence of Christ, matters less for the arrangement of the family than it does these much more fundamental disagreements. Like if you can't agree that God exists or that there is a foundation in natural law and the logos, which all Protestants, Catholics have the same, then you're way further apart than Charlie Kirk and his wife.
Okay, hold on, because we're coming up at 2 hours, so
Yeah.
I got to wrap it up.
Wait, can I just?
You can, go ahead. Yeah, Pisco, you can go ahead. One more thing, but we got to end it.
The last thing I want to say is, although I wish I could talk about the Germanic Empire stuff pre-Hitler, because I think that those kinds of systems do lead themselves to a lot of wars and did. That's the one point I'll make on that is because you seem to suggest that Hitler's nationalism did lead to a bunch of war. It did, but that only happened out of the cauldron of World War I, which is very much informed by this old aristocratic class and
separate debate.
Okay, but on the issue of
there's an answer to that, but go ahead.
Yeah, sure. And just the last point on this. It seems like what you're pushing for, the Catholic ideas don't matter that much. And what you're pushing isn't really a kind of Catholic right-wing political vision. If it, who cares if the Eucharist is this or that? If these religious ideas aren't that important, then I just don't know in what sense you are advocating for a Catholic political system, especially when you're in favor of excluding like tens of thousands of Catholics from the southern border.
Okay, well, so this is a good clarification, but
go ahead.
Also a fairly straightforward one. I'm actually fond of saying this. Catholics and Protestants get into fights on the right wing all the time, and I am very fond of reminding them there's no active political disagreement that hinges on the difference between Catholics and Protestants in the modern world. The battles between people in the modern world always will hinge upon the things that are politically at stake in the moment. Now, ultimately, like in the ultimate sense about the fate of our souls, it matters very much about the nature of the sacraments or sola scriptura. But in our present political moment, that is not, no one's fighting over that right now. And so, the big argument, this is one of the reasons, Pisco, that the culture war is always more important than the economic war, because the culture war decides who will determine what is right, what is wrong, who is worthy, who is unworthy, who is good and who is evil. And most people make their decisions voting-wise and otherwise based on these moral distinctions, not in terms of economic calculus. So the culture war is always the prominent battle, and the culture war currently is not along the boundaries of Protestant versus Catholic. It's on the boundaries of progressivism versus older forms of Christianity, both of the Protestant and Catholic variety.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, that was great. I love that.
I will end with this last question. You have 15 seconds or less. I'm going to ask each of you.
Okay.
Dave, can you say one nice thing about progressivism?
Oh, interesting. Okay, I'll say this. Progressivism has found a way to exist and hold power in multicultural societies that traditional right-wing alternatives still have not developed yet, and for which we need to retrofit much older systems to even approximate. Now, while I think that this solution is in the process of disintegrating, I recognize that it currently solves a problem for which there is no operative alternative, but which I hope that future right-wing governments can test.
And Pisco, can you say one nice thing about conservatism broadly?
Yeah, I think that community is a term that matters a lot to me. It's a concept that's really, really important to me. And I find sometimes that progressives and people on the left, even though I don't agree that a lot of these old systems are the maximum good that we can provide or the way in which community ought to be expressed, I think that sometimes there needs to be a substitution for some of these structures that conservatives want to conserve in the sense of community, something that binds groups of people together either temporally in terms of distance or in terms of values. And sometimes, even though I largely identify as being a progressive on the left, I find that there's not enough of a positive project to build community in a way that some of these conservatives are able to.
And we'll wrap it up there, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Agreement.
Hey, thank you guys so
Who would have
much.
thought?
Let's talk again soon and keep it cool.